Those of you who have not been to 1776, this is the East Coast office of YSN, which you'll hear more about and get a chance to take a look around. But I want to thank 1776 for their partnership in hosting us as well this evening. I'm Richard Seeline. I'm the principal of Global, a very unique long title that I have tried to figure out how I came up with it, but Global Next Gen Advisors. I'm also a senior advisor to YSN in the Go marketplace. The reason why I'm a senior advisor is that I have shaved all of my gray hair off. If you see my listing, at least the original bio, I was listed as the gray hair advisor, which I couldn't figure out why since I have no hair. I'm honored very much to have you all here, and we're being live webbed around the world, and you'll also hear a little bit more about what our plans are with what happens here today in the way of broadcasting to a larger audience of folks. Let me just give you a little bit of background and set up to what we're trying to do, and then turn over to Jennifer. I had the opportunity to meet Jennifer Kushell, who you'll again be introduced to in a second, about 2 years ago when I served as the Executive Secretariat of the G8 Summit of Young Global Leaders. Now, one thing about Jennifer that those of you who have met her already know, those who are meeting her for the first time, is Jennifer is one of the most powerful, persuasive individuals I think I've ever met in my life. And I thought I was powerful and persuasive. At least I told myself that. But Jennifer is one of those individuals that once you start having a conversation with her, you kind of sit there and go, okay, tell me where I'm supposed to go, what my next step is, how I can help. Prior to getting a chance to meet Jennifer 2 years ago, and coming to Washington 23 years ago, which does make me old, I served in the White House running a presidential commission for executive exchange, where we brought senior executives from the government in and sent senior executives from the government out to the private sector. I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Economic Development, and then also got a chance to be one of the 3 liaisons for what was then the G20 summit down in Houston that President Bush 41 hosted. That gave me a really unique opportunity to begin to see something, and again, this is 20-some-odd years ago, for which some of you were not born yet. So I was a youth at one point, all right? 20 years ago, this idea of introducing entrepreneurship around not just the United States, but around the world was really just at the cusp. And so you all have had a chance to see something blossom in lots of ways. And you'll hear from leaders up here on the panel and some who we're going to connect with live around the world. But one of the things I took away from that experience over the past 20 years, and especially since Jennifer and I got a chance to start working together 2 years ago, was something very, very simple. In a lot of conversations that she and I and others have had with former Joint Chiefs of Staff from the Pentagon to ministers and former presidents of countries around the world, one single factor of that conversation over and over and over again was the national and economic security issue dealing with global youth unemployment. And I think Jennifer and I also shared something in common, and that was we were sitting on lots of panels, going to lots of meetings, going to hundreds of conferences, talking repeatedly about this issue, and kind of seeing the needle move a little bit forward, but not significant enough. And that was something where when I heard Jennifer say, Richard, I really want to use our platform, our networks, our organization to not just move the needle significantly, but to, in a sense, change the dialogue. And it's not that there aren't lots of organizations and institutions in the United States and around the world that are focused on this. And you're going to hear from a couple of folks who are literally day in and day out at the State Department and a lot of other organizations focused on this. But one of the other issues that we found was, how do you change the dialogue is by forming a new set of partnerships and actually getting a way to connect the dots. And that's been one of the challenges I think I've heard from some people already this evening, is there is lots of activity. But if I was a young person passionately looking for what my, in a sense, my career path, where I want to go with all of what I'm ambitious about, it's somewhat fragmented. And again, that's one of the reasons why you're here tonight and what we're about ready to talk about. Last but not least, the individuals that you see sitting up here were individuals that we sought out, and in a sense, we really knew through our own networks, were individuals from Liverpool, State Department, Gallup, who were literally talking with lots of youth around the world. And that was the other challenge, was instead of having us old guys talking with each other about how to solve this problem, the most important step that we felt was, how do you get the voice of the youth who really are engaged in this, who really want to do something about their careers, their livelihoods? How do we engage them differently? And last part of that is the engagement piece. So through YSN and through the Go Marketplace, which you'll hear about, one of the examples that I took away from Jennifer's passion was the 100-country initiative done with Subway sandwiches and Subway franchise, which again, you'll hear a little bit about later on. But when you can start engaging 100 countries very quickly, to me, that starts changing the dialogue. So thank you for being here. I think you're a part of something that is profoundly going to be a significant opportunity for all of us. But it's also a challenge to those of you who are here, those of you who will be listening to this, and others that were not able to make it tonight. This is the challenge that I put before you. We need to partner in a way that we haven't partnered in the past. It's not about one organization versus another. It's not about one best practice versus another. This is an opportunity through what Jennifer and our team have really put together. And it's on that note that I want to make sure that you, if you haven't had a chance to meet the YSN team who put together what you're seeing tonight, what you'll see on the website, what you'll see throughout all of our social media, this is an incredible team, and I've worked around lots of individuals and lots of teams. So from Cece to Jennifer to Brendan to a whole set of folks that hopefully you'll get a chance to meet, I want to thank them. With that, Jennifer Kushell is a person who in her simple way, and I say that with a very humble heart, in a simple way, is a person who will not take no for an answer. And that is the reason why I and a lot of other folks that you'll again start hearing about have begun to team with Jennifer, because she is an individual who started at this 20 some odd years ago and has not stopped keeping her foot on the gas. I mean, it's just full length, full time. So Jennifer, thank you for all of what you do for all of us, and thank you for what you're doing for the youth of the world.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for coming out. We have a wonderful group of people here today. I'm blown away looking at the RSVP list of the people in the room. Our goal was not to convene thousands of people, but to bring together the people who were actually doing the most substantive work in the world on this issue. In the room, we have people who represent hundreds of thousands of young people around the world who are building very substantive programs, who are running companies that are really pushing the needle on what can be done to push initiatives forward. And it's very exciting to have our panelists here, to have all of you here, and I hope you take this opportunity to make some connections that you might not have had. First, before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge one or two quick people. First and foremost, one of my oldest relationships in the room, Julie Cantor-Szilard. She's been a major power force at NIFTY, the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, with 600,000 kids served and taught entrepreneurship. She's now leading the charge on helping kids learn about STEM education and creating some very significant initiatives in that field. And another person I'd like to invite up for just 1 minute, if it's okay, is Special Advisor Zeenat Rotman, who is Special Advisor to Secretary Kerry, runs the Office of Global Youth Issues. I just wanted to welcome you. Thank you so much for being here. And could you just introduce yourself and what you're doing with the office, because it's so significant that the government has created an office to address youth issues right now, and we're just so proud.
Thank you, Jennifer.
To be friends.
Please stay here. Hi, everybody. I see amongst all of you many friends in the audience, some of whom I work with in government. I think, as was said before, it's just your kind of compelling nature and personality is why, Sabeen and I have both been very dedicated to finding ways and creative ways to bring in everything you're doing to what we're doing. I'm reminded of the State of the Union yesterday and kind of the two, buzzwords that the president was trying to put out there, which are opportunity and innovation. And to me, our Office of Global Youth Issues does represent an innovation in diplomacy, and that's born of a desire to try to do partnership and do engagement with young people around the world in a way that impacts them positively, that builds partnerships that are untraditional, and that helps us respond to a changing world better. And so I'm very ably represented by Sabeen, Malik on this panel, and she'll kind of deep dive into the things that we're doing and the different models that we're looking at. But I love the idea of not duplication and just working together. And so thanks very much for having me.
So much. Thank you. All right, we'll get started real quick. So we have a really fascinating group of people here, and I'm really thrilled that we can have them with us. First and foremost, I'll start on the end, if you don't mind. John Clifton joins us from Gallup. He's the director of Gallup Government and also the deputy director of the Gallup World Poll. So basically everything the Gallup is tracking globally is in this gentleman's hands, and he has been doing some extraordinary work on the youth sector too, and uncovering a lot of interesting trends around entrepreneurship as well. So maybe do you want to take a minute or so and just talk about what you're doing at at Gallup and some of the just a high level work as it relates specifically to like youth and employment, and then I'll go through the panel.
Well, thank you for that. And first of all, I just wanted to say thank you to 1776 for having us here and having this important conversation, because, of course, any conversation around youth and entrepreneurship is an important conversation. Some of the things that Gallup's working on right now, one is that we are building a module right now to try to systematically track entrepreneurship in every single country. We've been doing systematic tracking of things like well-being, attitudes toward the economy, attitudes toward leadership. We're even now systematically tracking unemployment in every single country in the world. But one of the things we want to know is what countries have the most momentum in terms of entrepreneurship and also startups. And it's one thing where there's a huge data gap that exists. We would like to close that data gap and start tracking it systematically around the world. The other thing that we need to do, and I'm happy to talk about this more, is we need to put in place a system where we can track the blue chippers or the freaks of nature that are entrepreneurs. Because right now our system is built, it's been established, that we find freaks for innovation. We know how to test them, we know how to identify them, and we know exactly how to get them in the best schools in the United States. But the problem is that great ideas and great innovations don't become great innovations until they have a customer next to them. And so a lot of people say, what comes first, entrepreneurship or innovation? Is it the chicken and the egg? That's the wrong question. Because the right question is it the horse or the cart? Because the cart is innovation. But the thing that pulls the cart is, of course, the entrepreneur who creates that customer. So we're working on an assessment right now, and we just came live with it about a month ago, in order to help individuals identify their strengths, their entrepreneurial strengths, and they can take it online. So those are just some of the things that we're working on now.
Thank you. I have a lot of good questions, and I'm sure the audience does as well for you. Sabeen, Malik. Sabeen has become a very good friend over the years. As you know, I'm extremely excited about this Office of Global Youth Issues that you're running, and all the initiatives that Zinat and Sabeen are really pushing forward to make the voice of youth and the topic of youth really important in our government and around the world as powers that be convene. In the past 2 years, you've been traveling everywhere and really meeting with the top companies, the top organizations, many of the biggest world leaders and thought leaders in the world. Can you share a little bit about what your takeaways have been?
First of all, Jen, thanks so much for convening, and again to 1776 for hosting, I think, what's a timely topic. And again, I'm not just saying this timely in terms of because I'm seeing this issue every day, but as has been mentioned with the World Economic Forum just happening a few weeks ago, and then also with the State of the Union, this is an issue that's pressing on many people's mind in the public sector, the private sector, civil society, you name it, everyone sort of thought about it. I think Jen gives me a little too much credit in the sense of I have traveled and I've talked to many people, but probably I could be doing more and we could be doing more. But regardless, in the engagements that I've had thus far, I think three things are pretty consistent that we keep hearing over and over again, which is the scope of the problem, right? I think for a long time, everybody was sort of understanding that this is a global problem, it's a large number, and why is this number growing? So I'm going to paint a little bit of a picture in the sense that the latest statistics say that 74.5 million youth, when we're talking about people between the age of 15 to 24, are unemployed. This has gone up even from last year. So we're at 13.3%. That doesn't even include people who are not in employment, meaning you're not actually physically even looking for a job. So this number could be in any way a tip of the iceberg in terms of what we're trying to understand. And John, you're sort of the numbers guy, so correct me if I'm wrong here in stating any of this. But when we're talking to the various different individuals who are looking at this from various interests, so for example, why does business care and what's the business case? Over and over again, the issue has been, in order for us to grow, we need talent. And we just cannot find talent that is helping us get to our bottom line. So there is, again, not just the question of we can't find the people, but even if we find individuals, there's a gap in terms of what we need them to do and how much we can actually train them to do what they need to do. Another big issue is just in terms of governments, right? Governments ultimately are looking at their 5-year economic growth strategies and are wondering, what are the sectors that we want to be involved in? Where do we want to start to put some sort of incentives? What do we need to do between our education sort of paradigms? What do we need to do with our business paradigms? And then what do we fundamentally need to do in terms of bringing all these sectors together? And that's a complicated equation, and one in which I think we're still starting to see what that looks like. And I think the president's call last night sort of showed, and he specifically put the call out and said, I'm talking to these individuals, and I'm talking to the universities, I'm talking to the CEOs, I'm talking to civil society, because we need to get these people around the table to figure out what we need to do better and how we can do it. So this is a question that multiple governments are looking at and trying to figure out what's the right paradigm. And lastly, one other thing that in terms of trends that I want to note is, I think for a long time people have sort of seen this as an issue that was just based on, we cannot find the right business case to make. And I think more and more what you're realizing is this no longer is just an issue that is we feel good about it or we're doing good about it. It's become a business issue. Now, we can debate the merits all day long of why that needs to happen or what that sort of brings to the issue. But regardless, there is now a sensible case that can be made and the dots connected in terms of what this actually produces. I read a statistic that, I don't know where it can be equated to, so I'll need to look this up, but basically said that for every 1% that global youth unemployment comes down, $73 billion is put back into the economy in terms of consumption. So again, this is something that we need to start to look towards in terms of making our arguments and looking at all the people that are working on this issue and what needs to happen going forward. So I'll just leave it at that.
So you did say one of the things that stood out the most about what you said to me was to all of us was the concept of finding the talent. I laugh every time I hear people talking about how there is no good talent in the world and they can't find talent to fit the positions that they have. And we've traveled all over the world. We've been to 50 countries. We work with young people in 160 countries at YSN, and everywhere we go, we have young people coming up to us, running up to us, telling us how hungry they are and all the things they want to do. And they're articulate and they're passionate and they're ready to work, but they don't know where the jobs are. And to illustrate a little bit more about what this younger population looks like and the real story, we hear so many of the negative things about millennials, about the next generation, how they're entitled, how they are lazy, how they don't have a strong work ethic. Well, Chris Arnold is here all the way from Liverpool. He literally flew in from Liverpool to be here with us today. He's one of the most extraordinary leaders I've ever met. And I think we felt like we were almost twins when we first met because we had so many of the same ideas in the world. And we were kind of hearing what each other had done because we wanted to be the first to do X, Y, and Z. But we have this wonderful relationship that we've built in the past few years now. And Chris is the head of a program called World Merit. And he brings together together 70,000 young leaders every year who compete in a leadership competition to go out and do wonderful things in the world. And when we talk about where is the young talent, it's in organizations like Chris's. And so I want him to tell you a little bit about what he's done. He's also a very successful entrepreneur who has also run organizations like Camp Leaders and A Smaller Earth. And then also he was the host of the Global Entrepreneurship Week in Liverpool. And we have some people from Global Entrepreneurship Week here as well. But Chris, would you introduce yourself a little bit and talk about the young people that you work with?
Okay. I'm Chris. I'm the happiest person in the world. And I'm not joking. You laughed then, and I'm not joking. I'm the happiest person in the world because of one thing. I've got a 4-year-old, which that's sometimes not that easy, but he's a good boy. And my 2-year-old, very good boy, and he loves his dad. And they're going to grow up into a world that is going to be so fabulous, because I'm an optimist. But I know this factually because we work with so many talented, collaborative young people that are ignoring borders, ignoring the paradigms that previous generations have had to put up with, that are utilizing things like social media to kick arse. And arse is the way you say it, not ass. I think Americans say ass. That makes me happy. I think that there's a great chance that if people in this room, all of us, mentor and help sometimes with giving direction to the next generation, that we're going to be in a good position. Isn't that an optimistic thing to feel? I'm normally a hugely positive person, but my energy is down a little bit tonight because, and I just wanted to not thank the venue. Both these guys thanked 1776. Well, 1776 is a very tough year for British people, so it's made me a bit miserable being here. So the upcoming generation, it makes me optimistic. That's interesting. But entrepreneurship is the thing that's made me fulfilled. It's the thing that gives me the choice to try and do things that I think need doing. And there have been entrepreneurs, obviously, for the entire history of mankind and womankind. But the next generation and the way that they do entrepreneurship, because of things that maybe are getting role modeled now, are much more collaborative and much more inclined to be co-founders than egotistical maniacs. And again, another reason for me to be happy, because even though I am an egotistical maniac, I'm glad that there's less and less of us around. So I'm Chris.
Can you just explain World Merit? Because you can do it much better than I can. I think it's so important that everyone sees this. This is really, I mean, we've worked with dozens and dozens of global youth organizations who are really connecting with young people, and no one does it the way that Chris does, really.
So actually, I was asked 3 years ago by Erin Wiley and other people to run a global engagement campaign to get young people engaged in entrepreneurship, and I said yes. And then Erin told me that I had to pay for it, which I didn't realize before I said yes. But we ran this campaign, and it was just an off-the-cuff thing that my businesses paid for, and it felt good. And what happened was we found truly incredible, idealistic young people who wanted to make a big difference. And the competition is this great prize, a trip around the world for a year, and they get to meet, they get to see global issues and then meet world leaders, allegedly, and try and give some solutions from a youth perspective about how to impact those global issues. But the problem is, that trip around the world, we only have one winner, and we were having 60,000 people compete for it. So rather than just leave the other 59,000 young, idealistic, collaborator, global citizens to their own devices, we created a social media platform called World Merit that we launched in April that has 75,000 people on. And the premise is this, that you take action, those actions give you points or merit credits, and those credits make you eligible for opportunities. So do something, get points, get opportunities. And I've got evidence of thousands of young people doing incredible community work and gaining confidence through small entrepreneurial actions just for 500 points. It's amazing to me. They're willing to be motivated by the very smallest things and the simple permission to do something. And that's world merit.
Thank you. So I want to ask the panel, what's in this whole conversation about youth unemployment, what are the most significant things that you see are missing? What are the conversations that are not being had?
I think there are two. And the first one is when we hear about data on global unemployment, one of the challenges that we're dealing with is how wrong or how unhelpful current unemployment data are. I think we all know this. It's been written about it extensively. But right now when you look at unemployment data, the challenge is that if you work 1 hour, you're paid 1 hour in the past week, and then you get that survey, whether it comes from the BLS or it comes from a central statistical office in the capital city of another country, and you're asked, did you work an hour in the past week? You're considered minimally employed. But the challenge with that is, of course, you're not unemployed. So therefore, you don't fit within that traditional rubric. To further compound the problem is if you stop looking for work, you are now out of the workforce. And of course, the third thing, when we hear self-employment in the developing world, what type of self-employment are those individuals having? Usually it's not self-employment out of opportunity, it's self-employment out of necessity. We can see it in the data through their well-being, and everything that they're doing is not because they're trying to create the next biggest global Fortune 500 company. They're on the street corner begging. Yet we consider those individuals self-employed. If you take all that data, the unemployment problem is probably 2 to 3 times worse than what our traditional statistics tell us. So I would say that that's problem number one. The second problem is, back to my original point, is how are we finding these superstars? We know what the problem is to job creation. The problem to job creation is all jobs that are created, at least in the United States, do not happen from the federal government. They also don't happen from large corporations. In fact, large corporations shave about 1 million jobs per year. Why? Because they purchase other companies, smaller companies, and they let people go. The job creators in America, in fact, it's not just small businesses, it's the shoot-ups. That's where all job creation happens. So one of the big problems is we don't have enough of a focus on who are those stars that can help us have more job creation faster, so they have more of those shoot-ups. By the way, a very startling data point right now that nobody talks about comes from the federal government, collected by the census. I think it's actually collected by the Small Business Administration through the census. Just 2 years ago, we crossed for the first time. This should be the most frightening data point that exists. In 2008, we had more births of businesses than we had deaths by 100,000. What is it today? Because if leaders don't know this, how can they fix the problem? It's completely flipped. We now have 70,000 more deaths of businesses than we do births. Again, until we bring back that spirit of entrepreneurs, the shoot-ups, we have a very, very serious problem. So I would say those two things.
I love that. I always wonder, too, why we fund a lot of new ideas and new innovative startups and encourage people to go and write business plans about brand new thoughts, but we don't actually fund people who have actually employed people before. You know, that's one of the things I wonder, too. People who have had 10 employees, 20 employees, 100 employees, maybe they've had 2, 3, 5 businesses in the past. We're not putting support around those, around the ones who are fast growing. And that's, I think, another demographic that we're not talking about that maybe we should.
Yeah, just to, not only reiterate John's points that he's sort of put, but I want to sort of take this in the context of, there are some factors when we look at sort of this problem. It's a global issue, but the solutions tend to be ones that we need to focus on probably more at a regional, national, local level. but at the same time understanding that there are some trends that we're sort of seeing globally. And what does that look like? You know, I think one of the things that we've seen on multiple occasions now, and multiple studies have sort of shown this, is, you know, there's not really still good understanding of what is it that we're talking about when we're talking about job creation and sustained creation, right? And this gets conflated. This gets conflated in multiple ways, which is to say that if, for example, you're looking at sort of seeding funding or looking at where that job growth is going to happen, which industries, what are the type of sectors that we're sort of trying to look at, and then more importantly, who are the individuals, shall we say, whether we call them entrepreneurs or not, but really what is the name or lexicon that we're using to address who are job creators? It's not uniform, and that's part of the problem. Is when you're talking to policymakers, I think a lot of times these issues get conflated. And what happens is then you don't end up having responses that actually are looking at or trying to really understand and parse through the data in terms of who and what is actually creating jobs at the level in which you need them to work at. Because a lot of times you have, at, again, a global scale, certain models that you understand work. But then when you start looking at the local context and what the local needs and things are, those two are at a big disconnect. And this has happened in multiple cases now where you look at sort of regional approaches to what you sort of look at as job creation strategies, economic growth strategies. But then when you sort of look at the local context of where the needs are, there is again a, if you will, a disservice, I think, in a way of understanding what those contexts are, where the actual sources of information are, and to flow that into some of the regional strategies. So this ends up becoming, I think, a conversation that you sort of see happening at the local level with a lot of detail. You sort of see at the global level a lot of detail, but not at the mid-level. And I think this is something that needs to be sort of, if you will, heightened and understood better in terms of where we're understanding what those plans are, who sort of, if you will, understanding where those job creators are, and then more importantly, how do we actually connect them up? And we actually see this in the United States quite a bit. But again, I caution to say that what we're sort of doing here at the United States is potentially one model, but we need to understand what are the other models that work too. And I think there are several that are sort of starting to show some fruit, and people have done some better research on it. But we're still, you know, I think part of this is we're still in that data collection phase, and there just hasn't really been good understanding on multiple fronts.
Yeah, I hear you. And it's, you've both highlighted some very significant things that are missing. When I get crazy frustrated about wanting to act and act and act and not wait, I'm a quick start. From statistics in data science world. I like to just do things really quickly. And I meet someone like Chris and I say, okay, what do we do with your 70,000 people? What happens with these kids once they win a competition or they participate in a competition? We ran the contest with Subway. We got young people in 100 countries to play a business simulation game in 6 weeks. So when we talk about my team, they laugh at me when they say 100 countries very quickly. I think I got it from Richard, I just realized. But you know, in 100 countries, when we can activate young people, when we can get them excited for a short period of time, why can't we expand that? Why can't we grow it? Chris, when you're dealing with your young leaders, they're going out and doing extraordinary things in very short periods of time. They package themselves beautifully. They share what they do. They leverage social media. Where are they having trouble connecting the dots? Because these kids should be running companies and organizations in the outside world, but sometimes they're not making that connection.
I think there's a problem for all of us that we have got a very warped view of success and entrepreneurship, in my opinion. So in America, I think you have things like the Shark Tank and The Apprentice and ridiculous things like that give a false impression of how difficult it is to start, and I personally hate it. So I think the thing that stops people from taking the big steps most is actually the confidence. And the Western world particularly, there was a stat that John gave me before, and if I'm wrong, just tell me, you're the Gallup man, but that America is, in terms of the confidence of the environment to start up, that might be phrased slightly different, that America is the 89th most confident or least confident country in the world. Is that right? Is that?
Yeah, what we did is we asked in every single country in the world, we said to people, randomly selected, face-to-face interviews in 80% of the world, and we said to them one question: is the city or area where you live a good place or a bad place to live for people who want to start a business? that data should be something that leaders of countries should follow very closely. And right now, America's is on a slight decline, and we are about 85th to 89th in those rankings, and we dropped 5 points from last year. By the way, China, who some consider as a competitor of America, they're about 103rd, but they increased about 4 to 5 points from year to year. This is something that needs to be tracked very closely, because what we've learned from a lot of our research is the best experts on some of these subjects are the people who know their communities the best. And if you can take that information and roll it up to an aggregate level, you can get a very good understanding of what's happening in the country.
And the UK is lower than the US because we're full of cynical critics who, it's a horrible, horrible place, which I love. The reason I pointed that stat out, which I thought was very interesting, is I think having Richard Branson on stage is too much of a gap. We've got no role models who are in achievable spaces. You know, Mark Cuban or whoever your entrepreneurs are, you know, you've got quite a few of them. You know, the gap's too big. Can we show off some of those smaller businesses a little bit more, please? And also, just one final point on this confidence point. I think for a lot of people, entrepreneurship itself, starting a business itself, is a huge step, obviously. And I would like to see, for our younger generation, the upcoming, the teens, but even before that, have more experience being asked to deliver something small, entrepreneurial events. And I think your education and Nifty is a great organization, but I think we have to give experience of starting something and creating something that is a little bit smaller than business.
Well, it's interesting you said experience in starting something, because that was a huge part of the State of the Union, talking about the year of action. Even Madeleine Albright said in Morocco a couple months ago that it was so important to get young people involved in leadership organizations, and we should start more. And, you know, there are so many incredible organizations that we can get kids in. One fascinating thing we found with Chris, too, is that kids who accelerate in certain global organizations, if they find out about others, they will jump and participate in those. And then they'll jump and participate in others. One of the huge problems that we see with YSN is that everyone is, I wanted to write an article for HuffPo on stop hoarding our young leaders. Stop hoarding members of your organizations and introduce them to others. I always wonder, why do we not take the kids who go through Nifty and learn entrepreneurship education and then give them to a STEM organization, and then give them to ISIC and have them do global internships, and then throw them into Students in Free Enterprise or Enactus and get them building competitions, and then go to Chris and get a chance to travel to every continent in the world with World Merit. That's how we create world leaders, for sure. My concern is that we create these fabulous experiences if our kids are lucky enough to get into them. They go for 2 days, 5 days, a week, a month, a year, 2 years, and then they leave and they crash. And everyone's saying they can't find good talent. But you have these kids who have gone through World Merit, who have gone through Nifty, who have gone through STEM education programs. So connecting the dots is one of the biggest reasons we wanted to bring everyone together and really start talking about that. How do we all collaborate? How do we all partner more? Because we're all doing great things. But sometimes it's a matter of just putting a blurb in your newsletter, or let us do your newsletter to the 70,000, stay connected to them the rest of the year. And let's connect those guys to 5 other different programs in the room. And then we're not just talking to 10,000 or 20,000, we're talking to hundreds of thousands, and then millions. And then when we get the economic data and we find out about what industries are hiring and what companies are looking for talent like Keith, we can connect them instantly. And that's where 100 countries very fast comes from, Jen.
Jen, can I just jump in for a second? I think you've hit on something that is part of the, if you will, understanding of why this is such a challenge sometimes. I think one of the things that we're talking about when we're talking about trainings and looking at this is, you know, I think we've talked about multiple things on stage, all of us have, in the sense of talking about entrepreneurship, talking about skill building, talking about the idea of where growth is going to come from, and then looking at sort of how do we connect the dots on this piece. And I think what ends up happening is there's an assumption here that's made, is that somehow if all of these things are happening, then somehow there is a, if you will, a platform that's not big enough to connect all of this up where someone can just plug in and do so. And I'm sort of seeing a little bit of an opposite reaction, which is a little bit of also like there's just too much out there. There's so much that we can choose from now that it's also overwhelming in terms of what the outcome is. Fundamentally, we started at a place here, even in this conversation, in terms of talking about global youth unemployment. But we've talked about multiple things here. We've talked about entrepreneurship, soft skills, life skills, training, education. You see what I'm talking about in terms of where all these different pieces then end up sort of leading into directions where the conversations need to stem to a point where we're actually getting folks into a platform / into some sort of a pipeline, whatever you want to call it, where they're ready, able to execute on whatever it is that they want to do. And I think that's where sort of there's this, if you will, understanding, I don't know if you want to call it a little bit of maybe a global conversation, if you will, of what that pipeline could be like. And this pipeline is maybe, for all intents purposes, global in scale, but it has to be, I think, contextualized to what we're talking about, because in certain places, quite frankly, where growth is going to happen is in places like the informal sector. And that's not even what we've talked about here. I mean, we're only talking about maybe 5% of what we consider job growth activities. So with that being the case, I think that's some of the conversations that need to happen on the sides of what we're talking about.
One of the other things that I'm always fascinated by is how we define work. And you brought that up at the very beginning. In the data you're collecting, oftentimes, or that people are collecting, oftentimes you work 1 hour and that's considered work. But at the same time, I think we're putting so much pressure on young people to go out and get jobs. And get jobs, get paid. What does that actually do ultimately to the economy? It puts warm bodies in seats in offices collecting paychecks, and discretionary effort, which is how much energy you put into your work, goes down and down and down. And if you're an entrepreneur or you're a nonprofit, you know every single person that you hire, everyone who works for you, you have to scrape to keep. You have to justify. But I think we're sending people out with the idea to work without trying to really teach them about how to connect what they're passionate about, what they're skilled at, with real opportunity. One of the things we've been talking about a lot at YSN is this opportunity spectrum. The idea that you can work in many different forms. You can do internships, volunteer projects, you can do consulting, you can do a wide range of different things. And that really is work. That's opportunity. And instead of letting people sit around and wait for the right job, especially one that they don't even want to take in the first place, I love this idea of just sending them out, and also sending them globally too. Obviously, there are lots of visa issues that we still have to work out, but I'm going to keep saying it because I think it's going to happen and it's going to get fixed somehow soon. But when we talk about work, I mean, isn't a lot of this about the actual mobility, getting out, doing things, being exposed to opportunity, whether it's nonprofits or different countries?
Yes. I want to give a compliment to America. I think it's long overdue from me. I've spent a lot of time over here in the last 20 years, and it's on this point. I used to mock the major and minor system that you have at universities over here, because I went to university in England where you have to pick what you want to do when you're 16, and you're forced all the way through it. And I used to mock the fact that my American girlfriend studied backpacking as a minor for a while, and it was ridiculous. However, that person was so much more centered than I was at 21, 22, 23. She was so much more in touch with what her passions might be. So I think you've stumbled onto an education system that might work, just an opinion. I mean, we're clearly more intelligent than you guys, but that was a joke. But what I think Jen has said that I couldn't agree with more, the most important thing I ever did was to travel the world and put my environment and my life into a context by which I could then spend the rest of my career or entrepreneurial behavior creating something that fit the world. So for me, travel is so important to the progression of anybody and understanding of other cultures, and trying to collaborate beyond that.
Young people traveling the world. We have 2 young leaders coming in on video for us from both Brazil and Malaysia that we thought were really important because we very rarely get the chance to hear the actual voice of these young people. One of the other things I wanted to highlight is when we did a study a couple years ago of young people graduating, going into the workforce from 50 different countries, and the number one statistic that came out of that was that over 50% wanted to start their career in a different country. Any final thoughts on mobility, global mobility, and how important that is now? Because I know
I would just say that before the conversation that we have on training or mobility or anything, we have to get things in order right. And the first thing we need to come to grips with the fact that there are some people in this world that God bless them with being entrepreneurial freaks, not unlike great NBA players, NFL stars, or those that are working in labs in the U.S. government coming up with some of the great inventions. What we need to do first is find out who those freaks are. Because if we don't find those freaks, we could train a whole bunch of people and they may not be the superstars. Just in this example, right now if you think in the United States, if you're a great football player, when you're a little kid, and they see you running around in the little leagues, whatever you call it, the high schools will pick you up at a very early age. And then after that high school player is a standout star, they'll either catch you on TV, the scouts will come watch you, or, by the way, there's a new startup in Lincoln, Nebraska named Huddle, they will have video on you that will now go to all college campuses, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, the Michigan Wolverines, and they will find you. And then you will get a top scholarship, and you will play at a top university for football. And after that, you will be seen on national TV, and you will go in the highest in the draft. That is a system that has been built to find the most unusual NFL stars right now. We don't have that for entrepreneurs. What we've estimated in our data is that right now, there are 3 in 1,000 young people that are entrepreneurial freaks. They're our next stars, and they're going to save this country and all the other countries that have that 3 in 1,000. They are our next Wayne Huizingas that can make the 3 companies turn into Fortune 500 companies because they have such an unusual talent. So I just wanted to say that we need to get things in order right, and one is finding those freaks. And by the way, it's not going to happen at the federal level. And this is not a solution that will come from Washington. It is not a solution that will come from capital cities, whether it's Addis, whether it's London, whatever the capital city may be. It needs to happen at the city level. And if you don't have instruments to find your stars, a lot of times leaders in the community can get in and find those stars because those are the kids that need the training, and those are the kids that also need the mentorship, because mentorship is fundamental to entrepreneurs that are developing. So we need to get that order right, and we need to find those 3 in 1,000, because those 3 in 1,000 are going to be our freaks that help us create those jobs going forward. And by the way, they have one of 2 things in common, and one of them is very uncomfortable for people to talk about. They're driven by one of 2 things. One, to make a lot of money, and we cannot be turned off by that conversation, because there are entrepreneurs that desperately want to make a lot of money, and we should celebrate them for that. And the other thing is they want to change the world. That, too, is something that we should celebrate. And again, I fully agree with the fact that we need better stars, stars that people look to and say, I want to be an entrepreneur just like that, because that will help us bring out the 3 in 1,000 faster.
I just challenge one thing that you said about the 3 in 1,000. When you look at aspiration, there might be 3 in 1,000 who are really hardcore entrepreneurs, but when we survey young people, we find that like upwards of 70-80% of them are hungry, and they want to do things. They want to start businesses, but they just don't know how or that it's possible. And back to what Chris said, I think sometimes we make too much of what entrepreneurship is. It doesn't have to be a VC Silicon Valley startup to be a startup. You know, every day people in their underwear with no money start businesses. It happens all the time, and some of the biggest companies in our world were started by teens and 20-somethings with nothing. So,
if I may just respond to that, you're absolutely right. But if you look at small businesses around America right now, because we've called them and we've asked them, 75% of businesses don't want to grow. And they're doing it for a different reason. They're doing it for a thing that is fundamental to this country, which is freedom. They want to be their own boss. And if you ask young people at a very early age, many people want to be their own bosses. But there is one challenge. The job creators are the shoot-ups, not just all small businesses. We need those shoot-ups that become great companies very fast, because on an annual basis, that's where all the job creation happens. So I fundamentally agree with everything you said.